The old castle stood silent against the stormy night. Inside its dark halls, something terrible had just happened. Marcus Blackthorn, the most feared vampire king in all the lands, lay motionless on the cold stone floor of his throne room. His long black hair spread around his pale face like spilled ink. Blood stained his royal clothes, and his eyes were closed as if he would never open them again. Sarah Mitchell had been working as a maid in the castle for 3 years. She was only 22 years old, with brown hair always tied back in a simple bun and kind green eyes that had seen too much darkness in this place. Tonight was different from all the other nights. Tonight, everything had changed. The battle had been fierce and loud. Sarah had hidden in the kitchen pantry, listening to the sounds of fighting echo through the stone walls. She heard the clash of metal, the roar of angry voices, and the screams that made her blood run cold. For hours, the castle shook with violence. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. Now Sarah stood at the edge of the throne room, holding a small candle that cast dancing shadows on the walls. Her hands shook as she looked at the scene before her. The great vampire king who had ruled with an iron fist for over 300 years was lying still as death. Around him, the room was destroyed. Broken furniture lay scattered everywhere. The ancient tapestries hung in torn pieces. Even the massive stone throne had cracks running through it. Sarah had every reason to run away. For years, she had lived in fear of Marcus Blackthorn. He was cruel and cold, treating his servants like they were nothing more than tools. Many maids before her had disappeared without explanation. Some said they tried to escape. Others whispered darker things about what happened to those who displeased the vampire king. But, as Sarah looked at Marcus lying there so still and broken, something strange happened in her heart. Instead of feeling relief or joy that her tormentor was finally defeated, she felt something she never expected. She felt sorry for him. He looked so alone lying there in the ruins of his kingdom. No one had come to help him. No one had stayed by his side. Sarah took a careful step forward, then another. Her soft shoes made almost no sound on the stone floor. She could smell the metallic scent of blood in the air, mixed with dust and smoke from the battle. As she got closer, she could see that Marcus was badly hurt. Deep cuts covered his arms and chest. His breathing was so shallow she could barely see his chest moving up and down. The smart thing would be to leave him there. The safe thing would be to pack her few belongings and run as far away as possible before dawn came. Other servants had probably already fled the castle, knowing that without their master's protection, they would be hunted by his enemies. But Sarah found herself kneeling down beside the fallen vampire king instead. She set her candle on the floor and looked closely at his face. Even unconscious and hurt, Marcus Blackthorn was handsome in a dangerous way. His skin was pale as moonlight, without a single flaw except for a thin scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw. His lips were dark red, and Sarah knew it was not from any paint or dye. She had seen those lips speak words that condemned people to death. She had seen them smile coldly when someone begged for mercy. Yet something about seeing him so helpless made her think of him differently. Under all that power and cruelty, he was still a person. A person who was now alone and dying in a cold, empty castle. Sarah reached out with a trembling hand and gently touched his forehead. His skin was ice cold, much colder than any living person should be. But then, again, Marcus Blackthorn had not been truly alive for centuries. Still, there was something about that coldness that made Sarah want to warm him somehow. She pulled her hand back quickly when she felt him stir slightly under her touch. His dark eyebrows drew together as if he was in pain, but his eyes stayed closed. Sarah held her breath, waiting to see if he would wake up. Part of her hoped he would not. What would she say to him? What would he do to her for seeing him in such a weak state? But Marcus remained still, lost in whatever dark dreams filled an unconscious vampire's mind. Sarah made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Instead of running away, instead of leaving him to die alone, she decided to help him. She did not know why. Maybe it was because she had always been too kind for her own good. Maybe it was because she knew what it felt like to be abandoned and alone. Or maybe it was something else entirely, something she did not understand yet. Sarah stood up and looked around the destroyed throne room. She would need supplies if she was going to help Marcus recover. Clean cloth for bandages, water to clean his wounds, and somewhere safe to move him where his enemies would not find him if they returned. The castle was huge, with many hidden rooms and passages that even she had not explored in her 3 years of service. She remembered a small chamber deep in the lower levels of the castle, near the old wine cellar. It was a place where the previous owners had stored valuable things during times of war. The room was hidden behind a tapestry and had its own small fireplace. It would be warm there, and safe from anyone who might come looking. But first, she had to figure out how to move Marcus. He was much taller than her and probably twice her weight, even though vampires were said to be lighter than humans. Sarah was strong from years of hard work, but she was still just a young woman trying to move an unconscious man who was over 6 feet tall. She went to find a wheelbarrow from the castle's garden shed. It took her 20 minutes to locate one and wheel it through the castle's corridors to the throne room. Every shadow made her jump, every sound made her heart race. She expected to see enemies around every corner, coming to finish what they had started with Marcus. But the castle remained empty and quiet except for the sound of rain pattering against the windows and the distant rumble of thunder. Sarah worked carefully to lift Marcus onto the wheelbarrow. It was not easy or dignified, but it was the only way she could think of to move him. His head lolled to one side, and his arms hung limply over the sides of the wheelbarrow, but she managed to get him settled. The journey through the castle's corridors seemed to take forever. Sarah had to stop several times to rest and to listen for any sounds that might mean danger was approaching. But each time, she heard only the storm outside and her own breathing echoing off the stone walls. When she finally reached the hidden chamber, Sarah felt exhausted but determined. She managed to get Marcus off the wheelbarrow and onto an old bed that had been left in the room. The mattress was dusty and the blankets were moth-eaten, but it was better than the cold stone floor. Sarah lit a fire in the small fireplace and found some clean cloth and a basin for water. By the flickering light of the flames, she began the careful work of cleaning Marcus's wounds. Some of them were deep and would need stitching. Others were already starting to heal, which she supposed was part of his vampire nature. As she worked, Sarah found herself studying Marcus's face more closely than she ever had when he was awake and dangerous. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of years of burden and loneliness. His hands, which she had seen deal death without mercy, were long-fingered and elegant, like an artist's hands rather than a killer's. For the first time since she had started working at the castle, Sarah began to wonder about Marcus Blackthorn's story. How had he become a vampire? What had he been like when he was human? Had he always been cruel, or had centuries of darkness and power changed him into something cold and heartless? These thoughts occupied her mind as she carefully stitched his worst wounds and bandaged the others. The work was slow and difficult, but Sarah had gentle hands and a steady nerve. She had helped her mother care for sick neighbors when she was younger, before her family died and left her alone in the world. By the time she finished, the fire had burned low and the storm outside was beginning to fade. Sarah sat back in an old chair beside the bed and looked at her work. Marcus looked more peaceful now, clean and bandaged and covered with warm blankets. His breathing seemed a little stronger, though he still had not awakened. Sarah knew she should probably leave now and let him recover on his own. She had done more than enough, more than any sane person would do for someone who had been their captor and tormentor. But something made her stay. Maybe it was curiosity about what would happen when he woke up. Maybe it was concern that his enemies might still come looking for him. Or maybe it was something deeper, something she was not ready to admit to herself. She pulled her chair closer to the fire and settled in to wait and watch over the vampire king who had fallen so far from his throne. Outside, the first hints of dawn were beginning to show in the eastern sky, but down in their hidden chamber, it was still night. Sarah closed her eyes for just a moment, intending to rest them briefly, but exhaustion finally caught up with her. When she opened her eyes again, several hours had passed. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and weak sunlight was filtering through a small window high up on the wall. Sarah immediately looked over at the bed, expecting to find Marcus still unconscious. Instead, she found herself looking directly into a pair of dark, alert eyes that were watching her with an expression she could not read. Marcus Blackthorne was awake, and he was staring at her with a mixture of confusion, suspicion, and something that might have been gratitude. But vampires, Sarah reminded herself, were masters of deception. She had no idea what he was really thinking or what he planned to do now that he had regained consciousness. The Vampire King's lips moved, and he spoke in a voice that was rough from his injuries but still carried the authority of someone who had ruled for centuries. Why, it was all he said, but Sarah understood that this single word contained a dozen questions. Why had she helped him? Why had she stayed? Why had she not run away or finished what his enemies had started? Sarah looked back at him steadily, her green eyes meeting his dark ones without flinching. She had made her choice to help him, and she would not show fear now, no matter what happened next. But she was not prepared for what she saw in his expression. Instead of anger or threat, she saw something vulnerable and uncertain, as if he genuinely did not understand why anyone would show him kindness. In that moment, Sarah realized that her decision to help Marcus Blackthorne had set something in motion that neither of them could control. Whatever happened next would change both of their lives in ways they could not imagine. The Vampire King had fallen, but perhaps this was not the end of his story. Perhaps it was just the beginning of something entirely new and unexpected. The maid and the Vampire King looked at each other in the flickering light of the dying fire, both of them aware that everything had changed. The old world of master and servant, predator and prey, had crumbled along with the throne room upstairs. What would rise from its ashes remained to be seen. Marcus Blackthorne tried to sit up, but pain shot through his body like lightning. He fell back against the pillows with a sharp intake of breath, his pale face growing even whiter. Sarah immediately stood up from her chair, her instincts telling her to help him, but she stopped herself. She was not sure if he would welcome her assistance or see it as an insult to his pride. "Do not move too quickly," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your wounds are deep. Some of them I had to stitch closed." Marcus turned his head to look at her more carefully. In all his centuries of existence, no one had ever spoken to him with such gentle concern. His servants had always addressed him with fear and formal respect. His enemies spoke to him with hatred or defiance. But this young woman was looking at him as if he were simply another person who needed care, not a monster who had terrorized the land for generations. "You stitched my wounds," he repeated slowly, as if the words were foreign to him. He lifted one bandaged arm and examined Sarah's careful work. The stitches were small and neat, done with obvious skill and patience. "Where did you learn to do such things?" Sarah moved back to her chair but remained standing, ready to help if he needed it. "My mother was a healer in our village. She taught me how to care for the sick and injured before she died." Marcus studied her face as she spoke. He had seen Sarah many times during her years of service in his castle, but he had never really looked at her before. To him, servants had always been faceless, interchangeable people who existed only to fulfill his needs. But now he was seeing her clearly for the first time, and he was surprised by what he discovered. She was pretty in a quiet way, with kind eyes and a gentle manner. But more than that, she had courage. It would have taken enormous bravery for a human woman to stay behind and care for an injured vampire, especially one with his reputation. Most people would have fled the moment they saw him fall, grateful for the chance to escape his domain forever. "You should have run away," Marcus said, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "My enemies may return. They will show no mercy to anyone they find here, especially someone who helped me." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Maybe I should have. But I could not leave you to die alone." Something flickered across Marcus's expression at her words. For just a moment, his carefully controlled mask slipped, and Sarah caught a glimpse of deep, old pain in his eyes. Then, it was gone, replaced by his usual cold composure. "You do not know me," he said, his voice growing harder. "You do not know what I have done, the lives I have taken, the suffering I have caused. I am not worthy of your compassion." "I know enough," Sarah replied quietly. "I know that you are hurt and alone, and that everyone deserves kindness when they are in pain." Marcus stared at her in amazement. In 300 years of existence, no one had ever said anything like that to him. He had been feared, hated, obeyed, and even worshipped by some of his darker followers. But no one had ever suggested that he deserved kindness simply because he was suffering. The Vampire King closed his eyes and was quiet for a long time. Sarah could see him thinking, working through thoughts and emotions that seemed to surprise him. When he opened his eyes again, there was something different in them, something softer than before. "What is your name?" he asked. "Sarah Mitchell," she answered, surprised that he was asking. In 3 years of service, he had never once inquired about her name. "Sarah," he repeated, as if testing how it sounded. "Why are you not afraid of me?" Sarah considered the question carefully before answering. "I am afraid," she admitted. "But fear and compassion can exist in the same heart. I have seen you be cruel and cold, but I have also seen you now, when you are vulnerable and hurting. You are more than just the monster people say you are." Marcus felt something crack inside his chest, something that had been frozen solid for centuries. This young woman was looking past his reputation, past his power and cruelty, to see something in him that he had forgotten existed. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. "Tell me about the attack," Sarah said gently. "Who were they? Will they come back?" Marcus struggled to sit up again, and this time Sarah moved to help him, placing pillows behind his back to support him. Her touch was careful and warm, and Marcus found himself leaning into it despite himself. "Vampire hunters," he said once he was settled more comfortably. "Led by a man named Jonathan Cross. I have been fighting him and his followers for decades. Last night, they finally managed to breach the castle's defenses." Sarah nodded, encouraging him to continue. She had heard whispers about vampire hunters in the nearby villages, groups of people who made it their mission to destroy the undead. They were said to be fearless and well-trained, using weapons blessed by priests and ancient knowledge passed down through generations. "Cross has been hunting me for 20 years, Marcus continued, his voice growing distant with memory. "I killed his father and his brother. He has sworn to destroy me, no matter how long it takes." "Did you kill them in battle?" Sarah asked. Marcus looked at her sharply, expecting to see judgment in her eyes. Instead, he saw only curiosity and a desire to understand. "No," he admitted. "I killed them because I was angry. Because I could. Because that is what monsters do." The honesty of his answer surprised even him. Marcus Blackthorne had never admitted weakness or wrongdoing to anyone, yet here he was confessing his sins to a human maid who had every reason to hate him. Sarah was quiet for a moment, processing what he had told her. "Do you regret it?" she asked finally. The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. Regret was an emotion he had thought himself incapable of feeling. Vampires were supposed to be beyond such human weaknesses. But, as he looked at Sarah's earnest face, he found himself examining his long life with new eyes. "Yes," he whispered, and the words seemed to tear something inside him. "I regret many things." Sarah reached out and gently touched his hand. Her skin was warm against his cold fingers, and Marcus felt a shock of connection that went deeper than the physical touch. When was the last time someone had touched him with kindness instead of fear or desire for power? "Then, you are not the monster you think you are," she said softly. "Monsters do not feel regret." They sat in silence for a while, both of them lost in their own thoughts. The small chamber felt like a world apart from the rest of the castle, a place where the normal rules did not apply. Here, a vampire king and a human maid could sit together as equals, sharing truths that neither had spoken aloud before. Eventually, Sarah got up to tend the fire and prepare some broth for Marcus. She had found supplies in the old storage rooms, enough to last them several days if they were careful. As she worked, she was aware of Marcus watching her every movement with intense concentration, as if he was trying to memorize everything about her. "Why are you doing this?" he asked as she brought him a cup of warm broth. "You could have left the castle. You could be far away from here by now, starting a new life somewhere safe." Sarah helped him hold the cup, noticing how his hands shook slightly from weakness. "I had nowhere else to go," she said honestly. "My family is dead. I have no friends, no other employment waiting for me. This castle has been my home for 3 years." "That is not the real reason," Marcus said, his dark eyes searching her face. Sarah felt her cheeks grow warm under his scrutiny. He was right, of course. There was more to her decision than simple practicality, but she was not ready to examine those deeper motivations too closely. Maybe I believe that everyone deserves a second chance, she said instead. Maybe I think that people can change, even after doing terrible things. Even vampires? Marcus asked quietly. Especially vampires, Sarah replied. You have had centuries to become the person you are. If you truly regret your past actions, you also have centuries ahead of you to become someone different. Marcus set down the cup and stared at her in amazement. You think I could change? I think anyone can change if they truly want to, Sarah said. The question is whether you want to badly enough to do the hard work of becoming a better person. For the first time in 300 years, Marcus Blackthorne began to hope. Not for victory in battle, not for power or revenge, but for something much more precious and fragile. He began to hope for redemption, for the possibility that he might someday be worthy of the kindness this extraordinary woman was showing him. But even as hope began to grow in his heart, Marcus knew that the path ahead would be dangerous for both of them. Jonathan Cross and his vampire hunters would not give up easily. They would search every corner of the land until they found him. And, when they did, they would show no mercy to anyone who had helped the Vampire King survive. Marcus looked at Sarah, who was now organizing medical supplies with quiet efficiency, and made a decision that surprised him. For the first time in centuries, he was going to put someone else's safety above his own desires. He was going to find a way to protect her, even if it meant sacrificing himself. Sarah, he said, his voice stronger now after the broth and rest. You must leave this place. Tonight, while it is still dark. I will give you gold and directions to safe passage. You can start a new life far from here, where my enemies will never find you. Sarah looked up from her work, her green eyes flashing with determination. I am not leaving you. You do not understand the danger, Marcus began. I understand perfectly, Sarah interrupted. But I made a choice to help you, and I am not abandoning that choice now just because it has become difficult. Marcus felt that crack in his chest widen further. This brave, stubborn, wonderful woman was willing to risk her life for him, a monster who had done nothing to deserve her loyalty. The feeling was both humbling and terrifying. Then, we will face whatever comes together, he said finally. Sarah smiled at him, the first real smile he had seen from her since she had found him in the throne room. It transformed her entire face, making her look radiant and beautiful in the flickering firelight. Together, she agreed. Neither of them knew that at that very moment, Jonathan Cross and his hunters were making camp just 5 miles from the castle, preparing for their final assault. They had tracked Marcus's blood trail and knew he was wounded and weak. This time, they would make sure the Vampire King did not escape. The second phase of their story was ending, but the most dangerous part was yet to come. In the hidden chamber beneath the castle, a vampire was learning what it meant to care for someone more than himself, while a human woman was discovering that sometimes the greatest courage came from staying rather than running away. The bond between them was growing stronger with each passing hour, but it would soon be tested by forces that wanted nothing more than to destroy them both. The real challenge was not whether Marcus could change, but whether he and Sarah could survive long enough for that change to matter. 3 days passed in their hidden sanctuary. Marcus grew stronger each day, his vampire healing abilities slowly mending the worst of his wounds. Sarah rarely left his side, bringing him food and changing his bandages, talking to him about her childhood and listening to stories of his long existence. During those quiet hours, something remarkable was happening. Marcus Blackthorne was remembering what it felt like to be human. Not the physical aspects, which he had lost centuries ago, but the emotional ones. He was remembering compassion, connection, and the simple pleasure of honest conversation with another person. Sarah was changing too. The fearful, timid maid who had served in his castle was revealing herself to be a woman of remarkable strength and intelligence. She challenged his darker thoughts, questioned his assumptions, and slowly helped him see the world through different eyes. On the 4th night, their fragile peace was shattered. Sarah was sleeping in the old chair beside Marcus's bed when she was awakened by his hand gently shaking her shoulder. She opened her eyes to see him sitting up, his face alert and tense. "They are here," he whispered. Sarah's blood ran cold. She could hear them now too, the sound of boots on stone echoing through the castle's corridors above them. Many boots, moving with military precision. The vampire hunters had found the castle. "How many?" she whispered back. Marcus closed his eyes and listened intently. His vampire senses were much sharper than hers, able to pick up sounds and sense that she would never detect. 20, maybe 25, he said grimly. Led by Cross himself. I can smell his determination from here. Sarah's mind raced. The hidden chamber had only one entrance, concealed behind a tapestry in the wine cellar. If the hunters found it, they would be trapped with no way to escape. But, if they tried to leave now, they would almost certainly be discovered. Is there another way out? She asked. Marcus shook his head. This chamber was designed to be a hiding place, not an escape route. We are trapped unless. He trailed off, his eyes growing distant as he considered their options. Sarah could see him thinking, weighing possibilities against each other. Unless what? She prompted. There is a way, Marcus said slowly. But, you will not like it. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, they heard voices much closer than before. The hunters had reached the wine cellar and were searching systematically through every corner and hiding place. Spread out came a deep, commanding voice that could only belong to Jonathan Cross. He is here somewhere. I can sense it. Check behind every barrel, every tapestry, every loose stone. The Vampire King will not escape us again. Marcus turned to Sarah with desperate urgency. Listen to me carefully, he whispered. I am going to surrender myself to them. While they are distracted with taking me prisoner, you will have a chance to escape through the chaos. No, Sarah said immediately. I will not let you sacrifice yourself for me. You do not understand, Marcus insisted. Cross wants me alive. He has spent 20 years planning his revenge. He will not kill me quickly. That will give you time to get away. And, what then? Sarah demanded, her voice still a whisper but filled with fierce emotion. I escape and live my life knowing that I abandoned you to torture and death? That is not living, Marcus. That is just existing. The sound of searching was getting closer. They could hear the hunters moving barrels and checking behind tapestries. It would only be minutes before someone found their hiding place. Marcus reached out and took Sarah's hands in his cold ones. You have given me something I thought I had lost forever, he said, his dark eyes intense with emotion. You have given me back my humanity. That is worth more than my existence. Your existence is worth everything to me, Sarah whispered back, and, as she said the words, she realized they were completely true. Somewhere in the past few days, she had fallen in love with this complex, tormented man who was so much more than the monster the world believed him to be. Marcus's eyes widened as he heard the truth in her voice. Sarah. I love you, she said simply. And, people who love each other do not abandon each other when things become difficult. Before Marcus could respond, they heard the sound they had been dreading. Heavy footsteps were approaching their tapestry, and a voice was calling out triumphantly. Captain Cross. I think I found something. The tapestry was yanked aside, and, suddenly, their small, warm sanctuary was flooded with torchlight and the gleam of weapons. A dozen vampire hunters poured into the chamber, crossbows and blessed silver swords at the ready. Marcus immediately moved to put himself between Sarah and the hunters, despite his injuries. His eyes flashed with dangerous light, and, for a moment, the fearsome Vampire King was visible beneath the gentleman Sarah had come to know. Stay back, he commanded, his voice carrying all the authority of his centuries of rule. The woman is innocent. She is under my protection. Jonathan Cross stepped through the crowd of hunters, a tall man with graying hair and eyes like chips of ice. He was dressed in black leather and carried a sword that gleamed with silver inlay. When he saw Marcus, his face twisted with 20 years of hatred and the pain of loss. Marcus Blackthorne, Cross said, his voice dripping with venom. Finally, I have you cornered like the animal you are. Marcus straightened to his full height, ignoring the pain from his still healing wounds. Jonathan Cross. You look older. The years of hunting me have not been kind to you. No less kind than you were to my father and brother, Cross replied. Their deaths will finally be avenged. Sarah stepped forward, despite Marcus trying to keep her behind him. Please, she said, addressing Cross directly. He is wounded and weak. There is no honor in killing a helpless man. Cross's cold eyes turned to her with contempt. He is not a man. He is a monster who has murdered hundreds of innocent people. And you. His gaze grew even colder. You are a traitor to your own species, protecting the very creature who would drain your blood without a second thought. You are wrong about him, Sarah said, her voice steady despite her fear. He has changed. He regrets his past actions. He wants to become better. Cross laughed, a sound without any warmth or humor. Changed? Do you hear that, men? The vampire's pet thinks he has reformed. The hunters chuckled darkly, their weapons never wavering. I have changed, Marcus said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner of the chamber. This woman showed me kindness when I deserved none. She cared for me when I was helpless. Through her, I have remembered what it means to feel compassion, to care for someone other than myself. Pretty words, Cross sneered. But words do not bring back the dead. Words do not undo centuries of evil. No, Marcus agreed. They do not. But actions can create a different future. If you let me live, I swear to you that I will spend whatever time remains to me trying to make amends for what I have done. Cross drew his silver sword, and the blade sang as it came free of its scabbard. The only amends you can make is your death. He raised the weapon to strike, but, before he could bring it down, Sarah threw herself in front of Marcus. The sword stopped just inches from her throat. If you want to kill him, you will have to kill me first, she said, her voice trembling but determined. The chamber fell silent except for the sound of crackling torches. Every hunter was staring at Sarah in amazement. Cross himself looked shocked that a human would protect a vampire with her own life. Move aside, girl, Cross commanded. You do not know what you are doing. I know exactly what I am doing, Sarah replied. I am protecting someone I love from people who refuse to believe that redemption is possible. Marcus felt his heart break and heal at the same time. This brave, wonderful woman was willing to die for him. In that moment, he made a decision that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. I surrender, he said clearly. Marcus, no. Sarah cried, turning to face him. I surrender myself to you, Jonathan Cross, Marcus continued, ignoring Sarah's protests. But, I ask for a trial by combat. Cross lowered his sword slightly, intrigued despite himself. What kind of trial? Single combat between you and me, Marcus said. If you win, you have your revenge and I die. If I win, Sarah and I go free, and you give us safe passage from this land. Marcus, you are still injured, Sarah whispered urgently. You are not strong enough for single combat. I am strong enough, Marcus replied, his eyes never leaving Cross's face. The question is whether Jonathan Cross is brave enough to face me man to man, or whether he prefers to kill me while surrounded by 20 armed men. Cross's face flushed with anger at the implied challenge to his courage. His men shifted uncomfortably, waiting to see how their leader would respond. You think to manipulate me with questions of honor? Cross demanded. I think to offer you what you have always wanted, Marcus replied calmly. The chance to kill me yourself, in fair combat, with your own hands. Is that not worth more than simply executing a wounded prisoner? Sarah could see Cross wavering. The vampire hunter's pride was warring with his practical desire for revenge. She held her breath, knowing that Marcus was gambling both their lives on Cross's need to prove himself. Finally, Cross nodded curtly. Very well. Single combat at dawn, in the castle's courtyard. But, if you lose, the girl dies with you. No, Marcus said immediately. She has done nothing wrong. If I lose, she goes free. She chose to help you, Cross replied coldly. She must face the consequences of that choice. Sarah stepped forward again. I accept those terms, she said before Marcus could object. Marcus turned to her in anguish. Sarah, you cannot, I can and I will, she said firmly. We face this together, remember? Whatever happens, we face it together. Cross sheathed his sword and gestured to his men. Very well. We have an agreement. My men will guard you both until dawn. Try to escape, and the deal is void. As the hunters positioned themselves around the chamber, Marcus took Sarah's hand and pulled her close to him. They had perhaps 4 hours until dawn, 4 hours that might be their last together. I am sorry, Marcus whispered in her ear. I should never have let you become involved in this. I chose to become involved, Sarah whispered back. And I choose to stay involved. Whatever happens at dawn, I want you to know that these past few days have been the happiest of my life. Marcus held her tighter, marveling at the strength and courage of this remarkable woman who had changed his entire existence. Tomorrow, he would fight for both their lives against an opponent who had trained 20 years for this moment. The odds were not good, but Marcus Blackthorne had something he had never possessed before in all his battles. He had something worth fighting for beyond his own survival. He had love, and hope, and the chance for redemption. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen, but, as he held Sarah close in the flickering torchlight, surrounded by their enemies, Marcus felt more alive than he had in 3 centuries. The vampire king had fallen from his throne of power and cruelty. But, from that fall, he had discovered something infinitely more valuable. He had discovered his humanity, and a woman brave enough to love the man he was becoming rather than fear the monster he had been. Dawn was coming, and, with it, the final test of whether love and redemption could triumph over hatred and revenge. The outcome would determine not just their survival, but the kind of world they would leave behind them. In the growing light of the new day, a vampire and a human maid would discover whether their unexpected bond was strong enough to overcome centuries of darkness and fear.